Hey guys, welcome back. Fast Monty's Garage. Today is Myth Busting with Mike Day. And what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about Pontiac engine cooling. Now, I've done a video in the past, right there, or maybe right here, of teeing off the rear of the heads to have coolant flow from the back of the heads back through the heater line into the timing chain cover. Now, that worked well and dandy enough when I had standard nipples back there, and I'll go through that in a second. But when I converted to AN fittings, my theory is my flow increased, and that caused too much heat to get into the timing chain cover, and I can't get my coolant to drop lower than 210 when I'm pushing it hard. So that's our theory today. Now, I have to thank someone in particular, Carl. I'm thinking of you. You brought this to my attention, and now today's the day we're going to experiment with changing that flow and see how the thermostat or the temperature gauge behaves, because I just put mechanical gauges in too. If you want to see that playlist, go check that out. So what we're going to do is go hit the workbench. I'm going to show you the proper flow of coolant through a Pontiac engine and show you what I did to modify it and what the myth is. So let's get to it. Here's the best diagram I can find of a Pontiac engine, basically 1916 up, where we have our water pump here. Obviously that's spinning. It's pulling in or sucking in coolant from the radiator, and then it's being pushed into the block on both sides, and then it runs along the block and supposed to come up into the heads, because there's several holes inside the heads, and then it gets pushed out of the heads into the crossover from both directions. And then when the thermostat heats up, that water is allowed to escape back into the radiator. That's the coolant loop. Now, all of us have a heater hose on the back of the passenger head. That goes into your heater box, and some people bypass their heater box and it just comes back into the timing cover, which is standard. Now, this water's flowing all the time, so one of the myths is this head has better flow than this head. As you can imagine, there's no concrete evidence saying this coolant back here that's getting heated up is getting out of the head as fast as the coolant in the front of the head, or all this coolant in the passenger head, because it has an escape path. So one of the myths that we're talking about is connecting or adding a nipple on the driver's side head and teeing off here. So you have coolant that's allowed to escape out the rear of the head. Now, I did that originally when I had just rubber hoses, you know, like this, teed off, because the nipples, the standard nipple on a late 60s head is looks like this. It has a spring in it that opens up as it gets hot and allows coolant to flow. So I had those installed on both sides, and that naturally added a restriction to that flow. And if you have like a 72 or newer Pontiac engine, you have this type. It has a rubber bushing in there instead, and that can be used for earlier Pontiacs as well if you need it. But regardless, both of them have basically restrictor plates in there. Now, when I converted to AN, like this picture shows, there are no restrictions in there. That's free flowing. So that's one of my issues I think I'm seeing, and Carl, I think you had the same issue, is that too much hot coolant was flowing into the timing chain cover, mixing with the cool coolant. So if you have too much hot coolant mixing with the cool coolant and getting pumped back into your engine, that negates the fact of trying to get hot coolant out, right? Because it's too much hot coolant. So that's the experiment today. Since most of my fittings are AN, I went ahead and got this really cool ball valve that has AN fittings on it, and we can experiment by turning the valve, let's say 45 degrees. Now it's halfway open, maybe experiment barely open, and definitely experiment fully closed, and see what our temperature how it behaves, because we have mechanical gauge in there now. It's going to give us the true temperature. The other myth that's going on, as I failed to mention, most head gasket failures are on this side because we're not getting coolant out. So I'm going to take my laser thermometer, or whatever it's called, infrared thermometer. I'm going to take some measurements along the head, say front and rear, both sides, when we have it closed, when we have it open, take some data and see where we end up. So I'm going to go ahead and drain my coolant, get under my dashboard, because this T actually goes in through my firewall. This little custom thing I made, and then it has a 90-degree angle, and that's an AN fitting right there. And that's where I'm going to put this. So I can adjust it on the fly if I need to while I'm driving. No, I can't reach it. But anyway, I'm going to show you that, and let's get to testing. All right, there's my valve. Check that out. It fits perfectly like it was meant to be here. So that's wide open. I'm not going to do any tests with that. I know that's too hot. So I think our next test, I'm just going to do halfway. So that's halfway, and then we'll do a test fully closed. So let's go ahead and get the car warmed up. I'm not going to drive it anywhere because when I had it, no restrictions, the fans would never turn off. That's how hot it was running. So and my fans are supposed to turn off like at 190 or 187, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do it halfway and get the car warmed up, and then do some measurements on the heads, front, rear, and the crossover. Be right back. All right, I decided to go on a test drive because it's fun. See how the temperature does. We're at halfway. All right, cruising at 2,500 RPM, fourth gear. It's about 70 degrees outside, and temperature is not exceeding 180, which is awesome, because when it was fully open, it would easily be at 200. So I think that's right in line with the theory that restricting the flow helps keeping the temperature down. So next part of that theory is what happens to the rear of the heads and the temperature. So the other thing is it backs up my theory of testing it in the garage while you're just idling, because that's the worst for our engines, is when we just sit around, we have no airflow in the radiator, and we're only relying on electric fans if you have them. My fans are set at 200 degrees on, 185 off, and right now cruising it's 180, so it's not even getting close. We'll see. All right, I'm back in the garage, and number one sign that I don't think halfway is going to work is I'm just idling here, and the temperature is 190, just fine. I'm okay with that, but the fans are on and it's not going lower than 190. So I think we have to take a mental note that that might be a sign that the valve is still too far open. So we'll try like 3/4 of a turn closed and see if we can get some better results with the fan cooling the engine off quicker. That might be the new benchmark, so to speak. Valve's at halfway and we're at 195. So I'm gonna go ahead and take some measurements on the heads, front and rear, and write them down. Right, so I got those measurements at halfway. Now let's do 3/4. Car is fully cooled off. This is the next day. So I'm going to go ahead and get it up to temperature, just idling. And we'll do the next benchmark will be, I think, I'll just idle till the fans come on, and then we'll time it to see when it cools off. Take some measurements of the engine, and then maybe go on a test drive and see if those measurements change at all. Man, this is getting crazy. All right, we're getting close. I think at 203, the fans are going to turn on, and then I'll hit my stopwatch. Now, fans are on. So I'm going to wait until this gets to, I think it's 185, but I can tell right here the actual temperature. That's why there's a difference. So when it gets down to 0 here, Fans are off. I'll stop the timer, and then I'll wait for the temperature to get back up to 195, turn off the engine, because that's what I've been doing for all the tests so far, and then I'll measure the temperature on the engine with my thermometer. Woo! Be right back. All right, that wasn't too long. 51 seconds for the fans to turn off. You see that 0? It means the fans turned off. We're at 185-ish, which is what I said earlier. So now I'll wait for the temperature to get to 195, turn it off, and go from there. But that's super promising, because when it was halfway closed, it took like 4 or 5 minutes for this to drop down for the fans to turn off. So that's good news. All right, cruising 182. Awesome. What I noticed real quick though, when I come up to a stoplight, if the fans are on, they turn off like in 30 seconds, which is awesome. So I'm a fan of the three-quarter close. So let's get back to the garage, do some more testing. All right, saw an improvement with that, so that was promising. So now we're gonna do fully closed. Hoorah. All right, quick refresher. I measured along the crossover 3 points and just averaged them. I mean, they were like plus or minus 2 degrees at each point. And then I measured right above the exhaust outlet on the head, underneath the valve cover on the front and the rear, front and rear. Driver's side was a little bit more difficult to get at, just because you have your steering column and everything back there, but did the best I could, took several measurements every time. This was probably one of the hardest things I've done for videoing, because I took over 5 days to take different videos and wait till the engine's cold, etc., etc. So drum roll, please. All right. Sorry for the eye chart, guys, but here's all the data I collected, compiled it, and it's pretty simple. We look at the top part of the chart here. We have where I idled the car from cold all the way up to temperature, let the fans turn on, let it come back down, let the fans turn off, let it naturally run up to 195 on our mechanical gauge, and then turn the engine off. These are the temperatures I got. Now the big takeaway here is the delta from front to rear of each head. And ironically, 50% closed somehow matched 100% closed. I just think I got lucky with the way the thermodynamics in the top and bottom hose there coming into the timing chain cover. Because if we look at how long it takes to actually cool the engine from fans turning on, it was much longer for 50% closed versus no flow, minute and 10 seconds. The best was with some flow. So the takeaway from the top chart is, yes, some flow does help. The other takeaway, if you have no flow, not a huge deal. Now if we go to the bottom chart is when I did a test drive, ran the engine, hood's closed, naturally it's going to be a little bit warmer in there, but the big takeaway here is look at the delta between having coolant that's too hot versus no flow. It's almost 10 degrees between the rear temperature difference. The other takeaway, look at the delta from front to rear. It's much more equal. So, where does that put us now? Well, the myth of cooling your engine quicker by porting both heads looks to be kind of true. It may not necessarily cool your engine, but it will even out the temperature in the heads, which is awesome. Now, those of you that are experts on the stock engine, I am not, because I ripped it out as fast as I could. I want to know, please tell everyone here, leave a comment below, how does the water work from the passenger side head into the heater box and back in? Is it always flowing, or do you have to turn on a heater switch for it to flow? I don't know that answer, so guys, leave a comment. Now let's assume it does flow all the time. If it does flow all the time, we just proved a major theory that the driver's side head is going to be hotter. We just proved that with the water flow. So one head is flowing water, the other one has a big delta front to rear. That could be a problem. So the myth of teeing off both heads, yes, it does help. However, you also need to monitor that flow. So the fact that I put a ball valve in and can control that flow, there's a sweet spot. So speaking of sweet spots, my engine is a 470 cubic inch engine. It's not going to be the same as everyone else. Aluminum heads, flow cooler water pump, B-Cool radiator, twin electric fans, and especially the big difference, size 20 AN hose on the top and the bottom. That could be another mistake of mine because the hose on the bottom is typically larger than the hose on top. For a good reason. You want your water pump sucking as much water as you can and high enough volume as you can get it. So if I reduced the diameter of the lower hose, I still have the same heater hose size. I now change the thermodynamics in that situation, right? So less cool water coming in, the same hot water from the heater hose. That's why I was having a hot running engine. So at a later date, I'm probably going to update to an electric water pump, and I'm going to put that stock hose back on. Yeah, and do this test again because I'm super curious. I want to be an expert of this cooling issue. So you guys just witnessed the difference between having a no water flow, the big delta front and rear, versus having some water flow is better than none. So the myth proves and it stands. Hope you guys learned a lot today. Next week, we're going to troubleshoot a FiTech issue. I can't get the car to start very quickly, especially when it's hot. We're going to go over that next week and we're going to fix that problem. So until next time, you guys know the drill. Build them fast, drive them faster. See ya.